So today we're going to go through a purchase order workflow example. In this case, we're going to be using UMA, one that we have built already. This is just going to be to show kind of how the workflow was set up, how it could be set up, and the different features that we have created within this one workflow. So first, we're going to start out here at the dashboard, the home screen. We're going to go to Customization, Workflow, and then Workflows. So in this sandbox account here, we have quite a few of them. I'm going to choose Purchase Order Approval Workflow, PO Approval, right here. And that'll bring me in to view the screen. So the first things that we did was that we created these 11 fields to be the different approvers or as like a housing for certain scripts. So each of the approvers, the CEO, CFO, controller, the manager, purchase order reviewer, FP&A, and the VP level, those are all different approvers. This PO type is a different field that we use to distinguish whether it's an inventory purchase or a non-inventory purchase. Then we need to look at this previous state. We use that one for when the purchase order gets rejected, and then the reject reason is the last field. So start off by creating those fields. It can change depending on the different workflow that you're trying to create. Yeah, so if they don't want to have a reviewer, or if the manager and the VP are going to be the same person, you don't have to include those steps. You don't have to include those fields. This is just this example in order to get their requirements to work. So after we've got that, some of the members on the team actually created these scripts, which basically pulls all of the information that we would need and puts it into all of these workflow fields that we just created. So there's a different, so here's one for the reviewer. It puts it into that new reviewer field that we just created. And once it does that, once it gets all of those field values, then it's going to set that on the purchase order. So here it says the reviewer, which is a field that we have set on the purchase order, is the workflow purchase order reviewer. So that's what this exact set field value is saying. And that's key. That's something that we need to set. So the first one up here goes out and finds who the reviewer is. The second one down here puts the reviewer in a place where it can be viewed, as long as you can view the record. So that's the next thing that we did to get this working. Then we go down here to this check type, and this is where we decide whether it is a an inventory, non-inventory, or if the purchase order has both of them. This is basically to create an error so that it cannot be processed because it wouldn't follow any one reason correctly. So that was one of the requirements, was there would never be a time where a non-inventory purchase was made at the same time as a inventory purchase. So we created this as an error so that it'll go back before even entering the workflow at all. This here is where it starts out, the purchase order. So as soon as the purchase order is created or requested, it goes into here, and this will set all of these fields that we have: the purchase order type, rejected reason, all of the approver users, the approval timestamps, the approval statuses are all set to empty or null. And this is so that just in case it gets rejected, it'll come back to the same starting spot. It'll wipe everything out, then we use the scripts to go ahead and fill all of that information back in. So it's very, very key in this case that we wipe everything out, because we have this next step, which is going to reset all of the values. And then just in case it does get rejected, you would want to remove all of the timestamps for the approvals, because they would no longer be a valid approval, because the purchase order would have to have been changed. So after we've decided what the purchase order type is and who the approvers are going to be, and we've set all of the approvers, then it's going to go in and say, okay, it's going to go over to this side. But how do we say who the reviewers are, who the approver is, and all of that information? We have actually set it up on the employee record. So let me just go over here to my employee record. Here I am. In the Human Resources subtab, we actually look over here, and there's a custom department, which is right here, and a type. Now, if we go in to edit this employee, this is where we have actually set up the workflow and the scripts so that they read off of these two specific fields. So this type, if we're in edit, we open it up, this will be which type of approver this person is. So here I can set whoever is going to be the FP&A manager, the controller, CFO, CEO. Those are all stationary users. There's not going to be a duplicate user for any of these people. The only one that is a duplicate user, where you could have multiple employees be the same role, is this functional head VP. So our scripts are set up so that when we say, okay, this is the functional head VP, it says for which department. And so in this custom department multi-select, we can choose the different departments that this person is going to be the VP approver for. The VP approver is the only one that this matters for, because there can be multiples. And a single approver could approve for multiple departments. So we have set this up so that this is going to be the way that it sets up. It chooses the different approvers. The other approver level that is not included here is the purchase order reviewer and the manager. The purchase order reviewer is set up right over here. It's a checkbox, and we've set it so that there's only one purchase order reviewer. So they're marked as this checkbox so that they can be set as the approver. The manager is based off of the supervisor for this person. So in this case, it would be Archana for mine. This is just the way that it's set up. So it goes, who is the PO reviewer according to this checkbox? Who is the supervisor of this purchase order creator? And then it goes, what different employees are these different types? Also, on this employee page is a very important feature for in case people are out of the office. We have an out of office checkbox where if this checkbox is marked, this delegate PO approval to field becomes mandatory. If the checkbox is marked and this is empty, it will create an error saying that you must select who to delegate the purchase order approval to or remove the out of office checkbox. So I'm just going to leave this alone. I'm not actually an approver in this, but that's just how these two features work. The out of office is really an important feature because a lot of the customers, these high level approvers can be in and out of the office quite a lot. So as long as you see that they're coming up on a time period where they're going to be out of the office, you can set this ahead of time and route all of their purchase orders to this secondary approver. So now let's jump in to the workflow again. So I'm going to go back to customization, workflow, and workflows. I'm going to leave the employee because I don't need to save him. Back into the purchase order approval workflow. And after it goes into other reviewer, then there's certain fields that are set as soon as it comes in from all of these scripting methods, so that the values are scripted, they're found, the type is chosen, and it routes over here. So here's a transition. It says move from check type to other reviewer if purchase order type is others. If we wanted to go the other way to inventory, we look at this transition over here. It says PO type is inventory, then it goes from check type to inventory reviewer. If we're looking at the check type transition workflow state, look at the transitions, we can see where each one of them go to. So here is, if the PO type is others, it goes to other reviewer. If it's inventory, it goes to inventory. If the PO type is empty, then after it is, after it's edited, it'll go to this PO type null, where after that one gets edited, it goes back to the beginning. And if somehow in the middle of all of these transitions, it changes to a total amount under $1,000, we've been told to move it to approved. Just automatically approve anything under $1,000. They shouldn't be creating purchase orders for under $1,000 according to their internal documents, but just in case it does happen, it'll automatically push to approved. So now we jump over to other reviewer, and I'm going to pull up the workflow state. First thing that happens as soon as it comes in to this new state is it's going to set the next approver as this purchase order reviewer. Then that workflow previous state is going to be set to reviewer. This is key just in case it gets rejected. We know which state to put rejected this purchase order. Immediately after those first two fields are set, there's an email that gets automatically sent out. The email is sent out on the condition that the reviewer approval timestamp is empty. What this means is this person has not approved this purchase order yet. If this person has approved this purchase order, it'll be a duplicate approval, which I will cover in just a few minutes. So down here, if we look down, we can see that the sender is going to be the employee. So this is the person who created the purchase order. They're going to be the sending participant. We're also going to choose to send it to this next approver field. Now this field is on the purchase order, but as we just saw, we set it through the workflow to be for this reviewer person. And then we look over here and it says, what is the content? So we've already set up a standard purchase order email. It says, here's your subject, gives you the purchase order number, and tells you that it's pending approval. The body of the information says basically the exact same thing, and we have chosen to include a view record link. What this does is it leaves a link on the email that the approver can click, and it'll jump straight in to the purchase order that was just recently created and is waiting for them to approve it. So that is sent out automatically as soon as it moves into each state. So if I look down here at this other manager state, we're going to see the exact same first three and even more fields getting set. So here it is. Here's the email again. When the manager director timestamp is empty, send it. If the approval status is empty, then it needs to be set to pending approval. Here we have a script set up so that if the approver has already approved, say they were the reviewer is also the manager, it will automatically set that the approval status is the same as the approval status for their prior entry, and the same thing for the timestamp. The timestamp will match exactly to whatever the last time that they approved it was. So this will go on down the line until it gets fully approved. And these emails will always be sent out at each step. So let's go back into the other reviewer, because there's more information here that we need to take a look at. So the next thing that we need to see is this add button. There's two of them. One is an approve button, one is a reject button. And this happens before the record loads up. So as the person is viewing the record, this button will show up under two conditions. The first condition is that the user who is looking at the record is the next approver, or the role that the user is using is administrator. We added this one, user role equals administrator, as a backup for just in case someone is no longer with the company and it needs to automatically be pushed to the next approver. Whoever is the administrator can go in and actually approve that purchase order to get it to the next step in the workflow. So it's kind of a backup worst case scenario. We have it built in so that it could be moved to the next person. The next thing to note is on exit. So after the reviewer has approved this purchase order, so they click the approve button, the reviewer approval status gets changed from pending to approved. The approval timestamp is automatically set for whatever the current day's date is. And this one was something that they wanted to have in just in case an administrator was using their administrator role to push this forward. They wanted to say, okay, who actually clicked the button to show that they approved it? And they wanted this just so that they could show the auditors and say, hey, look, this purchase order was sent to Jonathan for approval. Jonathan is the one who went in and approved it. So they can just be doubly sure and say, not only did it go to this person for approval, they're the one who clicked approve on this purchase order. And that's how it'll go on down the line. All of the workflow states are going to have these exact same setup. And if I look at the transitions, this is where it goes to different sections. So if it gets approved, execute on button approve, it'll go to the other manager. If the reviewer approval timestamp has a value or is not empty, as soon as the record enters this workflow state, move it to other manager. On the reject button, move it to rejected. And then these two here are for just in case while the purchase order is in approval, pending approval status, it gets changed. So if you're working on this purchase order and suddenly it changes and the amount is less than $1,000, it moves it to approve. If the record gets changed so that this purchase order type changes to inventory from the other or to both, it goes back to check type, which is where we defined what the PO type was and then sent it to the correct workflow side. So that's here. Once we get to the other manager approval section, we see that the set field values are the same. Here's your email that's getting sent out. Here's our approve buttons. Then we look at the transitions. This is where things got a little interesting with this setup, is that if the amount was less than $3,000, it should go to the FP&A approver for approval. If it's over $3,000, it should first go to the VP. So first we set these two so that when the total value comes in, if it's above $3,000, it goes to the VP approver. So VP approver is the next one in line. And if we look at them, here's the same set field values. Here's our email getting sent out. Here's the approval on exit, setting the more field values. Here's our buttons. Look at the transitions, and after the VP has approved it, it then goes to other FP&A. So the $3,000 limit is just saying, okay, the manager has the access to approve up to $3,000. If they approve it, send it on to the FP&A manager so that they can approve that it's a part of the budget, and we'll go ahead and pass this on through. You'll see that all of these have a secondary condition that goes to the exact same state, where it'll transition on entry if certain fields are set or not set, or they match up with something else. So these are set up so that there's no issue on the double approvals. Still going to come back to that. Look at the FP&A approver, and we can look at the transitions. And if it's under $25,000, then it's going to go to approved, right? Here it is. If they approve, totals less than $25,000, go to approved. If it's over $25,000, but not up to $50,000, it should go to the controller for their approval. If it's over $50,000, it goes to the CFO. Now, these were all set up by the customer. They said, this is what our requirements are, and we met the requirements. So we can see that this one workflow state can go to three different workflow states, 3 different transitions based on the same field, depending on what the value is. And if we jump down to the controller, they only go to approve or rejected. If it's not within their limit, it goes to the CFO, and he can either go to approved or the CFO. If we look here at the transitions, here it is, CEO or approved. Oh, sorry, this is the CFO. Again, by the $100,000 mark. So again, set up by the customer, this is what they wanted their values to be. So based on the dollar value, it'll go, each state looks at the dollar value to decide whether it will continue and to which state it continues to. Once it gets to approved, if we look down here, it's going to set the approval status for this purchase order to approved. It's going to send out an email to the purchase creator saying your purchase order has been approved. It's going to remove who the next approver is, and it's going to set the timestamps and say that it's approved. So everything's looking good here. So that's our sequence if it gets approved. Each one of these steps also had the ability for rejection. So if we look at the rejected, which is where every state transitioned to when it was rejected, it's going to first go to the actions, and it's going to say this purchase order is in rejected status. It's going to send an email to the employee saying your purchase order has been rejected, and it's going to give the approver a reason box to enter in why they're rejecting this purchase order. This is key for a couple reasons. Mainly, it gives the purchase creator instructions on what they need to change in order to get this purchase order approved. So this information gets filled in, set on the actual document on the purchase order form, and it gets sent back. And then if you look down here, we have all of our different approval status equals rejected, and that's based on the previous workflow state is one of these. So if it's a reviewer, it'll say the reviewer is rejected. If it's a manager, the manager is rejected. Here all the way down to the CEO, CEO rejects it. The last thing I wanted to mention was this double approvals. So just in case, say the manager is also the VP, you wouldn't want this person having to click approve twice on the same purchase order, because that gets annoying, and there are actually quite a few instances where the manager is the vice president, or the manager is the CFO or CEO or controller. So what we've done is we've set up that secondary transition so that if we look here at the VP, it's going to transition to other FP&A if their approval timestamp has been set. It's not empty. In order to get around a very few and far between issue is if the functional VP is the reviewer. So we just went ahead and set all of the conditions. You know, if this is a double approver for any of these, we're going to transition it still to other FP&A. So we have set that up on each step so that if the approval timestamp has been added in for this approver twice, if it's added in, it's going to move it on to the next approver step. One thing that is to note is what happens if the approver is the last approver on the chain. Well, then it's going to go to the approved state. And this is the controller approval is not empty. So they've approved it already as, say, the manager. And after the manager has approved it, it went to, say, the VP or the FP&A manager. But once that person as the manager clicked approve, then we have a script that says, if this person is an approver further on down the line, also set the same information. It's approved by this person. Here's the time that they approved it at. And that's why we can say if the controller approval timestamp is not empty, move it to approved. Because the only time that it would be not empty is if they have already approved it. So that went a little bit longer than I expected, but that's kind of how we set up the purchase order approval workflow for this customer. There's a whole other side for inventory. It follows the exact same formulas, exact same reasoning. Just the dollar values are different depending on where they want it to go. So you have two side-by-side approval sequences for the two different purchase order types. Thank you.